First, I should say it is great to have a lot of people in a room to talk about water. I've come to Aspen events. I think this is my third year, and I always sort of get disappointed that I don't see enough water conversation happening. So obviously, there's enough interest in this conference, so that's great. Um, Many of you know water is the lens through which we experience climate change. Too much water, big floods, extreme events, too little water, all the droughts in the West. You know, Colorado River have been experiencing a 20-year drought. California has been in more drought years since the start of this century than wet years. So it has been definitely a big challenge. Also, we see a lot of floods in every state. Obviously, we have in San Francisco, we have been experiencing a lot of flood. I know LA has been experiencing a lot of flood, East Coast as well. So, and while we are experiencing all these things because of climate change, a lot of that also has to do with the infrastructure that we depend on. The infrastructure that we are all relying on, was built in the 20th century with a different mindset for a different purpose to meet different challenges. And now we are facing totally different challenges, and this infrastructure is not necessarily really fit to help us meet what we are facing. So that's definitely a big issue. And also, many of these cities are dealing with sea level rise, especially if you're in Florida, and Miami for sure is definitely experiencing some of that. We also are seeing a lot of groundwater depletion across the country. Actually, I really appreciated the coverage of the groundwater situation in the US by the New York Times, because often everybody thought groundwater depletion is only a Western issue. And what we are seeing is actually that's not true, and it is an issue that a lot of different states are facing. And part of that is driven by the fact that we are depending more and more on groundwater because our surface water is much more unreliable. And another part of that is just because we are extracting groundwater faster than we are giving it a chance to recharge. So that is also becoming a nationwide challenge that we have to face. So I am really excited to have this panel here with me and have the chance to have this conversation with them, because they are bringing a very broad perspective to this conversation, and that is what we are hoping to sort of touch on. In my left, I have Nancy Sudley. She's the Deputy Mayor of the LA for Sustainability and Energy. To her left, Rachel Silverstein. She's the Executive Director of Miami Waterkeeper. And to her left is Daragan Tatek. If I mispronounce your name, you can correct me. I'm one of those people who gets her name mispronounced all the time, so I'm always sensitive. He's the CEO of Aneco Technologies. And we will have a discussion till quarter before the hour, and then actually till 4 o'clock, and then we will open it up to some Q&A from the public. So with that, I'm going to start with Nancy. Nancy, we're both from California, and we have been experiencing a lot of extremes, ups and downs, too much water, too little water. We don't even know what to do with this situation anymore. I know LA has been working on building a sustainability plan that sort of is much more wholesome and integrated and can look into different solutions. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do you think this sustainability plan, how is it going to help LA face the extremes?
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here. So let me just start by kind of level setting a little bit about Los Angeles and water. So LA, if it were just dependent on the average rainfall, could sustain a city of about 400,000 people, and we are 4 million people. And so the strategy going back more than 100 years was to, as in much of the West, to find a river basin and bring the water to Los Angeles. So today, about 85% of our water comes from outside of LA. LA has its own sort of captive water supply from the Eastern Sierra. And depending on the year, and wet or dry year, we may get between 25 and 50% of our water from our own Los Angeles aqueduct, and then buy much of the rest of our water from the regional water wholesaler, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which gets water from Northern California, from the San Joaquin, Sacramento rivers, and from the Colorado River, and has built the Colorado River aqueduct to bring water into Southern California from the Colorado River. And then the rest of it is is groundwater primarily. We have rights to pump in a number of several basins in the LA area, but that's really limited for a couple of reasons, primarily around a legacy of industrial contamination in those groundwater basins that have made them unusable for some part of our rights to pump there. But so as we look forward, and as you mentioned, we've been in this cycle of extreme wet and extreme dry. So before 2023, the 3 years before 2023, in California were the 3 driest years on record. 2023 was one of the wettest years on record. This year seems like it's something in between. It was very dry. In our Mediterranean climate, we get wet in the winter, dry in the summer. We had almost no rain or snow in November, December, and January. February, the atmosphere decided to hit California. So it creates water management challenges with these extreme cycles of extreme wet and dry. So our strategies looking forward, our goal in our sustainability plan is to reduce our reliance on imported water, to rely more heavily on local water supplies, and to really aim for zero wasted water. And so number one in our strategy is water conservation. And Angelenos have done a good job of conserving water, particularly indoors. We use less water today than we did in the 1980s, and even though we've added more than 1 million people to our population. And that's had all sorts of benefits. Our focus right now is on reducing outdoor water use. So we're paying people to tear out their lawns, with restrictions on how often you can water your lawn. And so hoping to get those gallons per capita per day down even further. And then looking at other technologies and other programs around stormwater capture, which in February we captured about 13.5 billion gallons of rainwater when it fell. That's a very large increase over what we've been able to do in the past, and some of that's around spreading basins, and around other water capture opportunities at kind of all scales, at neighborhood scale, at the large scale, neighborhood scale, and at the individual customer scale. And then looking at how we better manage our groundwater basins. So we tried finally to kind of get to the point where we could clean up our groundwater basins. So that's moving along. And that gives us really an opportunity both on the stormwater side as well as having groundwater available. And then looking at recycled water, so we have a project that's underway at one of our wastewater treatment plants, should be completed around 2027, which is one of the smaller plants, but then we also have a plan that's being worked on right now at the city's largest wastewater treatment plant, the Hyperion treatment plant. It's the largest in the West, to potentially recycle up to 150 million gallons a day. And then at the regional scale, the Metropolitan Water District, our water wholesaler, is working on a plan also with the LA County Sanitation District to do a large water recycling plant, actually not very far as the crow flies from our Hyperion plant. So trying to figure out how to integrate all of that. And so we think with all of those strategies, we'll reduce our dependence on the dependence on this hydrologically variable imported supplies and be able to increase our reliance on our local supplies.
Thank you. I think for California, snowpack is a huge, plays a huge role in water, sort of storing our water in a cheap, easy way. And I think I would say it's sort of our mountains and snowpack sort of works as a nature-based solution, which is sort of disappearing, unfortunately. And I think this is a very important segue to what I was hoping to ask Rachel. So Rachel,
Is this about the Florida snowpacks?
yes. So we decided we're going
It's going to be a tough question.
we're going to
Snowbirds,
send
not
our
snowpack.
snowpack over to your side. Do you have some mountains that you can keep them on? Yes. So actually, but it is important because it sort of touches on the fact that we all depend on these large, centralized, great infrastructure. Nancy touched on them, bringing water from one watershed to another watershed to meet the demand of people in cities and communities. And often when you ask people where their water comes from and where it goes, they don't know. So that's actually a big problem. But I think we have come to realize that this 20th century mentality of engineering our way out of our limitations, like how can we conquer nature to achieve water security, is sort of showing up to be not working very well for us. And I think there is this appreciation that maybe nature-based solutions are going to be a very important role in sort of helping us to weather the storm or weather the challenges that we are facing. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about like the role nature-based solutions can play in meeting climate extremes, I think in the context of Florida, but in a broader sense as well.
Yeah, and I think Florida and the story of Florida is all about trying to conquer nature and straighten rivers and channelize the Everglades so that we can live here. And what we're seeing now is that 150 years of trying to drain water off the Everglades and trying to redirect these natural water flows is affecting our drinking water because the flow over the Everglades is recharging the groundwater in our porous limestone. And we're starting to see the engineered systems put in place start to break down because of sea level rise. So it was never designed in the 1940s when they really started doing this in earnest to have the ocean be at the same level as these canals or even higher at times. And all of future resiliency here in Miami sort of comes down to the question of, does that canal system keep working? Because we have very porous limestone here. Of course, we have low elevation, a real lack of mountains and snowpacks. And that's what makes us so vulnerable. In fact, we have the most resources at risk worldwide right here in Miami to sea level rise. The water that you're seeing on the surface here in Miami is almost the same as what is happening underground. So as the surface water gets higher, the groundwater gets higher. So the flooding is not just coming from the coast during high tide, it's also coming up from the ground even when it's not raining. And that's what, really Miami Beach made famous, that sunny day flooding that they really tackled and took on. So now Miami Waterkeeper is really working to try to find solutions that are rooted in nature for these issues. And how do we go back to nature? So of course there's Everglades restoration efforts going on, and there are massive projects being proposed by the Army Corps of Engineers for Miami and cities across the country, I should note, to deal with storm surge. And those have been huge gray infrastructure proposals. And so the proposal for Miami was to put a 30-foot high concrete wall down the waterfront and through the middle of neighborhoods. And of course, that is incompatible with our engine of life here and why a lot of people want to live here, and our economy in Miami, which is our water. And so Miami Waterkeeper, along with a coalition of groups and our mayor, Daniela Vincava, were able to stop that project and to pivot it into hopefully something better and something that's more nature-based. So what we're really pushing for at Miami Waterkeeper is to find those green solutions where you can use coral reefs to slow down wave energy. On average, coral reefs reduce wave energy by 95%. Why aren't we considering coral reefs and restoring the coral reefs right offshore here as part of a plan to protect us from storm surge. Similar situation with mangroves. Miami Beach has, who's been to South Point Park during their stay? South Point Park has that huge man-made dune system. That is a form of green-gray infrastructure where they built this dune, but is now a functioning dune ecosystem supporting wildlife and habitat, and it's actually growing year after year. Whereas gray infrastructure starts to degrade and decay over time, the nature-based features increase, and they provide multiple benefits. So they are sequestering carbon, they're protecting storm surge, they're providing recreation opportunities, shading, water quality, on and on and on. So that's really where we find a lot of the solutions that we're proposing is looking to nature. How do we integrate nature into urban environments, even environments that have already been built like Miami, in every swale and roadway and building? And how do we think about these large infrastructure projects as working more with nature rather than trying to engineer around nature?
That's excellent. You don't have snowpack, but you have other things. Dragan, I think, obviously, desalination gets a very bad rap. Everybody thinks about desal as this big, massive plants that would suck in water, use a lot of energy. It also sort of perpetuates the existing model that we have. So that's why I wanted you to talk a little bit about how NECA's technology is different. How does it work? Tell us a little bit about what you guys are trying to accomplish through your technology.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, thanks for having us here. I'm from actually Canada, Quebec, where there's a bunch of snow. And actually it kind of highlights one of the challenges of water. It's so unevenly distributed around the globe. Like, it took me more than 20 years to ask myself where water comes from. In Quebec, we have like one lake for every 12 people or so.
So you can move to Quebec.
And it's no. But, and in 2017, we've set up like our demonstration site in Florida for our solution. So we do wave-powered sustainable desalination, which is actually combining nature's own resource, the seawater, and local energy, waves, to make it the source of abundant fresh water from the ocean. And desalination is kind of an underappreciated opportunity in general worldwide. There's over 150 times more water in the oceans than anywhere else. But obviously, like so far, its adoption has been limited by, first, it's expensive. It takes a lot of energy to separate the salt from the fresh water. And second thing, it's quite bad for the environment the way it's done conventionally. To give you an idea, so today, about 1% of the world's water comes from desal, mostly in the Middle East. And just for that 1% of water, it's almost 0.5% of the CO2 emissions from the globe. So we can't think of this as the main source of water for the planet the way we do it today. And there's other challenges facing desalination, like in California, a lot of pushback was first a lot of CO2 emissions, then there's brine disposal, there are some intake challenges, but there is ways to desalinate that is compatible with the nature itself. For example, at Onika, the way we do it, so we use the waves. So as you can imagine, so there's offshore buoys essentially that wobble around with the waves, and just as they move, they suck in the seawater. They split it into freshwater and low concentration brine that is diffused offshore. And all that fresh water is essentially pumped to the shore with an underwater pipe. So essentially that modular system is like having a tap right into the ocean. And waves are really powerful. Like you can extract a lot of water, fresh water from the ocean with basically no impacts on the environment. So just the city of LA, for example, has more than energy than to make an entirely new Colorado River just from its doorsteps. So there is great opportunities, and one of the things is with the modularity system, now we have a project that is being done underway in Fort Bragg, so northern part of California. And with a single unit, we're currently undergoing permitting. So as some of you are familiar, permitting desalination in California is quite challenging. But we were able to gather all the regulators in the same room for 2 times, and so far we're really working, if I may say, as a team to find the best. And honestly, they share us what's their concerns. We want to work to make sure to prove in real life that it addresses those concerns, and essentially leverage that to expand that solution locally. And worldwide, like unfortunately, we're coming to this end of easy access to fresh water. It's a really important thing to maximize efficiency, reduce use, but we should not ignore like the abundant source of water that is at like most of the population lives along the coastlines of this planet. So it's a great opportunity that could be taken if done right.
So you don't want Californians to move to Quebec?
It's okay.
You don't want to
I mean,
share your lakes? I'm joking.
No, but it's a fair statement.
Sunshine.
Like in the past, we were like shipping ice from Canada to the States and potentially having water pipelines, but there's other sources too.
I mean, I think one thing that you are touching on is that the 19th century, I mean, the older cities, if you think about, New York, all the European cities, they're all built around a river, right? Water source, because we have not figured out yet how to, I mean, the Romans technically had figured it out, but, if we were not doing it in a massive way that we did it in California, we just wanted to be the first to and can put as much infrastructure as we can and move water as far as we can. So we accomplished that for sure. But now we are facing the challenges of that. Nancy, I want to go back to the discussion on efficiency and conservation. I think you touched on that LA's population has grown significantly, but your water use hasn't really changed, which is absolutely great. Obviously, a lot of the utilities are really excited about big, centralized infrastructure and not as much enthusiastic about further bringing down water use. So I was wondering if we can have that conversation a little bit. Why is that?
Well, I'd say in LA, for the city of LA, that's not the case. And if you look over the last 40 years, it's really been a conservation first strategy. So in the 90s, the city of LA changed the rate structure for our water rates to be fully volumetric. So you use less water, you pay less. No fixed charges. So we've dealt with the kind of variability in revenue through a number of mechanisms, but I think we're kind of proof that you can do it. I sit on the board of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We're having this discussion right now over our budget, where there are still, even in Southern California, which has had to live with cycles of drought, really over the last half century, where some of our board members say, why would we sell less of our product? And but if you look across what makes up the rates that MWD charges to cities like Los Angeles, a lot of it is around energy. And because to get water from Northern California to Southern California, if you've been to California and tried to go from north to south, you might have noticed there's a very large mountain range in the middle. And so you have to pump water over some pretty high mountains. And similarly, from the Colorado River, which forms the border between California, Arizona, and Nevada, the water has to be lifted 7 times to get from the Colorado River into urban Southern California. So, and water's very heavy, so it takes a lot of energy to move water. And so if we can conserve water, we save not just from a kind of water management perspective, but from an energy perspective. And so I think this is going to be a continuing debate. I think in the water world, unlike the energy world, the idea of decoupling rates is not quite as well understood, where you kind of account for the conservation. But if we look at sort of the benefits of conservation, this I looked at it's probably a lot more now, but even 10 years ago, if you talk to the people who run our sewers, they say the city has saved literally hundreds of millions of dollars by not having to expand our sewer system because there's less flow through through the sewers, even though our population has grown. So I think the point is that we have to look at these things holistically. We have to look at it, and these are all integrated systems. Our energy system is integrated, our water system is integrated with our energy system because we have to move water around, heat water. There's they say about 19% of the energy used in California is used by water. Most of it is to heat hot water, but still about 5% of water, 5% of the total energy, electricity used in California is used to move water. So these systems are all tied together, and we really have to think holistically about efficiency as a strategy that will help us better manage all of the implications associated with a warming and drier planet.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Rachel, we talked about the benefits of nature-based solutions and how they can have multitude of benefits rather than just a singular benefit of providing this water to people or taking water away. It's easier said than done. Can you talk a little bit about how nature-based solutions fare against gray infrastructure, and what are the different strategies that can be used to justify, not even justify, to make sure they shine the way they should? And I think that going back to your comment on the dunes and how they are sort of perpetually improving rather than degrading, I would love to hear your perspective on that too. Like how this whole like economy of scale and all this, the way we do economics is impacting the way we decide what kind of infrastructure to build.
Yeah, absolutely. So nature-based features and green infrastructure appears to be such a win-win-win. Why are we not doing more of it? And I think that's really the fundamental question. And what are those barriers to actually getting the green infrastructure implemented? And I think it's a couple of different things. So one is, for a long time, it was thought we didn't have the ability to quantify and calculate, well, what is the benefit of this dune system? And that really feeds into, well, first I should say, we very much have the science now. And there should be no question on that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on the benefits of dunes, of mangroves, of wetlands, of coral reefs, on these various benefits. And in conversations with the Army Corps about this, of trying to get them to include green infrastructure, they have acknowledged, yes, we actually can calculate it. And we recently had CEQ White House guidance, draft guidance released on how are we going to quantify this. So I think that hurdle is going to be lowering, and hopefully we can get more of this quantified. But then there's another issue, which is the cost-benefit analyses that we run these federal projects through. And I think this is a major hurdle, and it is so fixable. And that's the good news. Wildly oversimplifying this, but in general, these federal projects like the Coastal Storms Surge Risk Reduction Project that we had that proposed the giant cement wall down the waterfront, they're looking to protect the highest amount of property value for the least amount of money. And that gets you the best ratio to hopefully get your project funded in Congress and built. And the only benefit that they're looking at is property value. And you can immediately see some issues popping up here. One is you are only going to end up protecting the high property value areas, not necessarily the areas that need the most support and resilience investment. And you're never going to get an equitable investment of federal resources if that is your formula. You're not solving for the right thing. And the other problem is that the benefits don't extend to, are we also going to sequester carbon? Are we also going to create a park? Are we also going to reduce heat? Are we going to improve water quality? Are we going to reduce the cost of needing to treat stormwater and sewage and save money that way? So none of those things go into whether or not these projects end up actually being built. So FEMA's actually made a lot of progress in updating their cost-benefit analysis. So after there's a disaster, they're doing a little bit better on calculating cost benefits. The Army Corps has not yet done that. And I think that's an absolute imperative to getting better projects that look at green infrastructure. The third major challenge that we've run into in getting green infrastructure implemented is an acceptance issue, I would call it, where we propose, hey, we're in Miami, we're looking at protecting coastlines from storm surge. We have coral reefs in our backyard. We should be looking at coral reefs, which, by the way, the Department of Defense gave University of Miami $23 million to try to build up hybrid reefs to protect military installations around the world. So the Department of Defense believes that this works and are investing in it. Army Corps, like, let's do this. This is our chance. But they sort of say, well, we don't do that. And that is not a good enough explanation, in my opinion, for how federal investments on the order of billions of dollars are being made in our community. And so really pushing on that and saying, we got to try this, and it's time to do it, providing the science, updating that cost-benefit analysis, and gaining that acceptance piece where they're willing to try something different. And they've told me, we're afraid that the reef will die, and then where will we be? Or the mangroves won't take, and they'll die, or the dune won't grow. Whereas we can build a wall, and we know how high it's going to be and what it's going to look like. And my response to them is what I explained earlier is, you know that in 50 years that wall is going to be degrading and have to be repaired. And that's not really factored in, that decrease over time or the maintenance. But look, if the coral reef does succeed, it is going to increase in value over time. And you're going to end up with a better project at the end that over the course of the 50-year lifespan that they look at is going to add more and more benefit. So just changing the way that folks are looking at these projects, considering them, and just being willing to try something somewhat out of the box, I think will get us a long way towards these green infrastructure solutions.
And I would say the wall can also fail, right?
Exactly.
If there's next big, huge storm that we haven't anticipated, I mean, you can't build a tall enough wall to.
Not to mention that the wall probably wouldn't have worked anyway, because it created sort of a bathtub effect to catch all the
Exactly.
rain.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yeah.
Lots of issues with the wall, but that's a great point. Like,
Right.
there's no guarantee about any of this, but at least
Yeah.
we're doing something positive for the environment, nature, and the community when we're also building these structures, the green
Right.
structures.
That's a very good point.
Can I just
Yes.
add something on that? So, we in LA we went to the voters. Actually, the county went to the voters a couple of years ago and asked people essentially to tax themselves to support green infrastructure projects. So Measure W passed overwhelmingly, and really to fund these kind of multi-benefit green infrastructure projects to manage water. So helping us to expand our spreading basins, lots of stormwater capture projects, and as I said, at all kind of scales. So I think they're, even in a different kind of setup, I think at least in LA, the public is convinced that these are strategies that are worth spending their own money on.
That's a great point. Dragan, I want to go back to the discussion we had about your technology, and I was wondering if you can touch a little bit on your recovery rate. How do you manage brine? And if you're a small city, how many of those units do we need to be able to meet demand?
Yeah, for sure. And if I may just to touch point
Please do.
onto
Yes.
nature-based aspect, like that's something also critical in our case as well. Like one doesn't necessarily go against the other. So in our case, where we have the buoys installed, we obviously need we do need an anchor, and that anchor could act as an artificial reef. Like we noticed, we had units actually in Fort Pierce since 2017, and it's sadly like a desert out there. When you're diving, it's just sand. But where there's buoys, actually the life around is blooming. And one thing we want to do is like monitor the nature surrounding the buoys, and we're working with a number of organizations. For example, in California, it's more kelp growth, so like combining kelp and what we do. Locally, it's less about corals, but it's something that we'd like to consider in other projects as well, like also anchoring the water pipe to shore. There's also, you need to keep it in place, so that can also be leveraged to improve the nature around the project. So it doesn't necessarily need to go against each other. I have a hard time imagining pushback from the community for the projects you do.
Community loves it, but it's getting the government to do it.
And in our case, like the community engagement is so critical. For example, in Chile, where we worked our way to community engagement. We have learnings to do. We're implementing now in Fort Bragg. We're almost like 2 years in advance that we started working with them. But getting people to know what you're doing is so critical. Like they had questions about like birds dying around, which had nothing to do about our buoy. It was like there was a bird flu around, but now that the community is more engaged, actually having local fishermen and people involved it's only people from the local small town that operate our unit out there. And it's something you want to multiply. So the benefits go beyond securing a new source of water. It's actually good for the local economy instead of, and it's a case for many like renewable energy projects. Instead of importing fuel, sending that economy elsewhere, most of the operation costs are for labor and local labor. So actually you keep that economy inside the city. Sorry, I went off track here.
No, I think that was a very valuable thing. And I think something that you touched on, and it's important about what you guys have been trying to accomplish, is this modularity, which changes the whole dynamic and the way things operate, right? So that's why I also wanted to see how you guys are dealing with the recovery rate and also sort of brine.
And the way our solution works is, so a project wouldn't be like a single really gigantic buoy. It won't even move anyway with big waves. So we need many of them to fulfill local water needs. So, for example, the one in Fort Pierce is roughly around 13,000 gallons per day, 50 cubic meters per day per unit. So for a city like Fort Bragg, there are 7,000 people. They use, now there's a bunch of people using different units, so acre feet and stuff. But essentially, like for that town, it would be roughly about 70 of these units, so like 7 by 10. So it's a relatively, when you look at this town scale, for a relatively modest area, and only 3% of the sea area is occupied by the buoy, so you can still navigate and operate around these units. And that modularity is key, so you can do like, instead of making a project in Fort Bragg and piping the water for 10 miles to Mendocino, you could just have a tiny array in Mendocino as well, and Eureka. So you can have that distributed source of water instead of having like a main source of water and pipe it over tens or hundreds of miles. And actually, the energy cost for piping, I believe like for Colorado River, it's like comparable almost to diesel, like the number of mountains but it's used a couple times along the way, so that's a good side. Like towns use it and send it back in the river. And the other thing about modularity, which is key, is the brine diffusal. So with our solution, it's really energy efficient. So our brine recovery, the recovery is essentially the fraction you keep as fresh water and the fraction that is concentrated seawater. So in a typical plant, you do roughly like half-half. So half the water becomes potable and half of it becomes essentially twice as concentrated as seawater. And normally, like for a big desal plant, it goes in one spot on the beach. So it has limited mixing. So what large plants do is that they need to essentially put like tentacles to diffuse it over a vast area. And with a solution like ours, it's embedded in the nature of the product itself. So if you need more water, you need more of these units. More of these units means more outfall points, really well distributed in deeper water where there is a lot of wave action and also ocean currents. And in any projects we'll do, they'll all be monitored, like on the buoy, underneath the buoy, surrounding salinity, because when we calculate it, essentially it's going to be difficult to measure even the difference in salinity, but there's nothing like real-life measurements.
Thank you. And I guess maybe a follow-up to that is you can also add to it, right? You can sort of start with a small number of them, and then if needed, you can, I think that's another value of modularity, that you don't need to build massive things and then wait for the demand to come.
Yeah, exactly. And it's based also on the local water portfolio. And when we began, like we can do a small portion of the city water need. So currently it's really a tiny fraction. The first unit, for example, at Fort Bragg. A second phase would be like 1/7. So we just increase the number of units to accommodate that. And later on, we could put a lot of them. And also on the finances side of that, it's way less risky to copy something you know that works compared to, for example, a big chemical plant that if you do it in a tiny scale, you're not sure if it's going to work as well when you put it in a really big scale, where in a solution like this one, you just multiply the working recipe and you can ramp up fast and fast. And it's something key for, and there's a bunch of solutions which are actually modular in this transition to sustainability. It's key that we have that opportunity to de-risk the solution, so we can, before we invest hundreds of millions, we'll invest tens, and before we invest tens of millions, we'll invest a couple millions. So that's the route we're taking as we scale up the business.
Thank you. Nancy, I want to go back to a slightly different topic, which is sort of the, I don't know if I should call it a conflict, but maybe a conflict between achieving energy security and water security and how sort of they come together. For example, I go into rooms that people talk about, we are going to make all the hydrogen in the world, and all we need is a treated water to just feed our hydrogen plant. And then I go to the other rooms, and everybody's like, oh, we're going to reuse the water and feed our city. And I know LA is in the forefront of some of these discussions with and it's not just hydrogen, every other decarbonization pathway we are looking at. I was wondering if you can sort of elaborate on how you guys think about these synergies or challenges, or how you're going to sort of prevent unintended consequences of these conflicting or connecting issues.
Yeah, well, we're hoping for not to have unintended consequences, but well, I think one thing we've tried to do over the last decade or so is really to understand that water energy interface, right? How do these two things come together? And if we look at LA's current system, the pretty much everything is less energy or carbon intensive than desalination, recycling water, even our imported water supplies. And our LA aqueduct is a gravity-fed system. Was built in the early 1900s and early 20th century. It is a net energy producer because it has small hydro plants along the run of the aqueduct. So this is something I think it's, in some ways the men who conquered nature in the late 19th and early 20th century in California were smart about some things, like designing gravity-fed systems. So we want to preserve that because then, that's a lot easier to manage. In the 1970s, the Metropolitan Water District was not selling a lot of water. As the region was growing, and they actually were proposing, or part of our proposal built nuclear power plant in the desert. It's called Sun Desert, and we're going to use water from the Colorado River for cooling the nuclear power plant. And if you look along the coast of California, you'll see I think over a dozen power plants along the coast, because in the 70s. The state said we don't want to use potable water to cool power plants, so everybody built their power plants along the coast to use seawater for power plant cooling. And now we're one day we'll be done with it in LA of actually not using seawater, not using once-through cooling to cool our power plants. So not to use seawater, to go to other cooling methods. So there is an intense sort of competition. So I think one of the criticisms of the desalination plants in California has been that they are keeping alive some old fossil fuel, very inefficient power plants, and the concern that more proposals for desalination plants will mean continued reliance on fossil fuel, even though the state has goals to get to 100% renewable energy by 2045, and in the case of Los Angeles, to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035. So I think that we do have to evaluate these solutions, and right now we're in the middle, or sort of the beginning of the middle of the beginning of looking at hydrogen California was awarded one of the Department of Energy's hydrogen hubs. And so what those projects are and how will the hydrogen be made, where will it be made, how will it get to the end users is still, that's part of what we'll kind of be working on in using that federal money to help build that hydrogen infrastructure. But that will definitely be one of the issues that we'll have to look at.
Yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to jump in on the nuclear question because we are dealing with that here in Miami as well. And we have a coastal nuclear power plant, and many nuclear power plants across the country are coastal or near water sources for cooling. So we have the Turkey Point plant here in Homestead. It's in between Biscayne National Park and Everglades National Park, and it was built in the early 70s, and it was one of those flow-through systems. So they would take water from Biscayne Bay to cool the core, and it would come back out. They found that was killing fish and seagrass, and were told that they had to put in a closed-loop system. So they dug basically a giant radiator through this porous limestone that we have, and the water would go into the plant, get hot, go back into this cooling canal system, travel for days, and then get used again, which sounds like a great solution, except that those canals are unlined, and we have these big holes in our porous rock. So the contaminated water in the canal system gets very dense and salty, and it sinks into the Biscayne aquifer that it's sitting on top of, which is our drinking water supply. And it has been spreading for miles in every direction away from the plant. So this has been going on for decades. And I should say this is not in our current drinking water that's coming out of our taps, but it's in the supply of drinking water that's trapped in the groundwater in the Biscayne aquifer. So that's been a big issue that the state has tried to deal with, that the county's tried to deal with, that Miami Waterkeeper has been addressing. And Turkey Point was the first nuclear power plant in the country to apply to extend their operating license from 2032, which is the current end date of the license, like many of the plants around the country, to 2052. And of course, low carbon or carbon neutral energy source, and is in a lot of the national plans for how we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. So it's not necessarily an anti-nuclear position, but we feel that we have to be considering climate change in the future of these nuclear power plants that are coastal and very vulnerable to sea level rise, storms, and heating. And of course, we have a lot of hurricanes here in Miami. That plant is at sea level, and they were awarded the license to operate into the 2050s without doing a specific analysis of climate change and the specific risks to that plant. So Miami Waterkeeper and NRDC and Friends of the Earth actually challenged that license, and we were able to get it overturned, pulled back to 2032, and now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has changed the regulations for the whole country for all the plants coming forward. They've proposed new regulations that require looking at the site-specific impacts of climate change on these nuclear power plants for the coming decades. And we just got a new environmental analysis from FPL to reapply to push that license back out to 2052 for our plant, and it still doesn't do an adequate job of looking at the groundwater contamination or the climate risks that are going to be coming down on that plant in the coming decades from heating the cooling canals. So the cooling canal systems reached 100 degrees this summer when it got really hot. How much cooling are they doing? And of course, sea level rise is threatening the area around the plant. The actual nuclear core is elevated, but the area around the plant, the backup power, the spent fuel, the roads in and out, those things are not. So we feel that it's critical to be looking at these risks when we're thinking about extending the life of these nuclear power plants into coming decades, and it's critically important and one of our major priorities that we're working on at Miami Waterkeeper.
I think the holistic look at everything that we have on the table, water, energy, decarbonization, everything, it's quite important. And I think some of the consequences we are facing right now is this siloed thinking, right? In this room, we are thinking about this. In the other room, you're thinking about water. In the other room, you're talking about climate. So it's not holistic enough. I actually want to open it up to questions. I think there's a sign at the end that I can't see. Whatever that is, I can't see.
We can't see any.
Okay, good, perfect. I saw a hand that was raised here. Please, go ahead. give it 1 second. I think, yes, thank you.
Is that on?
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying, this is for Nancy. So do you call it toilet to tap and cash for grass when you're talking about water reuse and what you pay people to tear out their yards, or has that been updated?
Yeah, we try to stay away from the toilet tap. In the early 2000s, LA was going full bore on what we would call now indirect potable reuse of wastewater, and one of the council members, city council members, dubbed it toilet tap, and that project died, and it stuck. But when you so we've done a lot more in terms of stakeholder outreach. We've had advisory groups. I think people have come around. We've got good examples in other places, including close by in Orange County. And LA has been recycling water, not necessarily for indirect potable reuse, but for seawater barriers, for industrial uses and others. So I think there's growing acceptance of that, but I don't think it's anything we can take for granted. But the truth of the matter is, if you're in Southern California and drinking water from the Colorado River, it has been through our neighbors in Las Vegas. They get a credit for all the wastewater that they return to Lake Mead. Somebody is drinking somebody else's slightly used water, but it's something we have to take seriously. The State Water Resources Control Board in California just finalized its direct potable reuse rules, so everybody's taking a look at that, and that is, belt, suspenders, and a hard hat before you can do flange recycle water. We're looking at both indirect and direct potable. We do have groundwater basins. We can use those, and are working on a number of projects around that.
And I would say Californians have been through multiple droughts since that time.
That has a way of focusing the mind.
Has refocused the whole discussion around the value of reused water. I see a hand, one here and then one right there. Maybe the lady there. Yes, please. And then we can go to you.
Thank you. Glad to hear that you're talking about water and that it's at the conference. So we're really realizing that it's tech solutions, it's nature-based solutions, it's also policy solutions. So I wanted to ask about SGMA in California, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and really what's come of it, if there's any lessons learned, as other areas are going to be in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, so I think what the lesson learned is it's really hard, and the reason that some of these basins haven't been adjudicated is because they're hard. At least for LA, we actually operate out of our two big groundwater basins were both adjudicated. So our pumping rights are been well defined, and there's a whole set of management systems in place. But I think if you look across California, before SGMA, there really wasn't a scheme in place. You either had to go to the courts to do the adjudication, or there was some reporting to the county, and that was about it. And we have, as I know here in Florida, terrible groundwater overdraft, a lot of subsidence, and this whole Central Valley has probably fallen, how many feet?
About 13, 20 feet.
Yeah, something like that, where communities in the Central Valley have basically been cut off from their drinking water because their drinking water wells were too shallow. So SGMA was absolutely necessary, but it's a tedious and laborious process to get through that. I don't know if you had some thoughts.
I mean, I would just also say policy is extremely important, as you touched on, and I think what we have seen with groundwater, it's not just California, everywhere, is the disconnect between land use and water use, right? And especially shows up when it comes to groundwater. Basically, you have a right to your groundwater when you have a land, and there's no insight into how much people are taking and how they're using it. And that is the fundamental problem. And that is a very important policy piece that needs to be addressed. Now, Sigma, yes, has made a lot of, at least we have something in place, but we still need to have a very good accounting mechanism to know who takes what, when, how much, who puts what back. We are actually accounting, like trying to use some of those depleted groundwater basins as a nature-based solution to store our major storms that come in and the water that comes down. Now the question is, okay, if you put it underground, who owns that water, right? So it's kind of like complicated.
Yeah, there's only two problems with groundwater. One is governance, the other is water quality.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
As soon as we fix those, groundwater will
We're on it,
yeah,
yes.
we'll be on it. But I do think the water quality issues too. I think particularly, we have them in LA for sure. In fact, one of our groundwater basins is a Superfund site. Well, that's fun.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences. But in the Central Valley as well, trying to maintain or improve water quality, especially when if it's the only source of drinking water for a community, has really been a challenge. And again, a number of communities have been completely cut off, have to have water trucked in. So, I guess Sigma may be, what do they say? It's the worst possible way to do it, except all the other ways to do it, to manage groundwater. But
maybe we should have
something.
shrunk the timeline. I think that was maybe the problem. But policy is an adaptive process, so it takes the time. Gentleman here with the hat.
Thank you, guys. Great discussion. I'm the mayor of a small town in southwest Colorado at the foot of the San Juan Mountains, and of course, very concerned. We've had long-term drought. I've just recently heard about a study that said as soon as the average winter temperature anywhere in the mountains gets above 17 degrees, snow goes away and it doesn't come back. Literally doesn't come back. And the Colorado River Compact is in this major negotiation. There's obviously big disagreement between the lower states and the lower basin states and the upper basin states. Is LA looking at what Dragon's proposing? His technology seems pretty promising. What do you guys think we're going to do to address this problem? It's so huge, and I don't know. I live in a little place that's getting very popular. Our property values have gone through the roof. But as mayor, I'm looking. Do we need to set a carrying capacity limit and say no more people can move here? Think about what that does to the property values. It's just crazy.
Yeah, well, the Colorado River system is very obviously very complicated. The allocation along the river was done in the 1920s and one of the wettest periods on record. So it's clear that the Colorado River is over allocated, and the only reason it hasn't been a crisis till now is that most of the states, besides California, have had low populations, and now, as you pointed out, and this is happening across the 7 states where the communities are growing quickly, and that sort of surplus is being sort of chewed up both by drought, by growth, and and the types of water use. So, at the end of the day, one of the things that we're doing at Metropolitan Water District is actually doing, for the first time, it's called a Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water, so Camp for Water, really trying to systematically analyze and provide a set of criteria by which projects and plans can be evaluated in light of a changing climate. So that process is going to help inform sort of what we would put forward in terms of some of the longer term solutions on the Colorado River. In the meantime, conservation is the way we're going to get through this. This, at least for the next few years. So in California, what that really means, the largest water the water district with the largest allocation in Colorado is the Imperial Irrigation District in southeastern California, the middle of the desert, a big agricultural area. So paying people essentially not to grow things and not to grow food. Is that a long-term solution? Probably not. But at least it'll get us through the next couple of years while we, work through the 7 states in California. It's not the state that's negotiating; it's the water right holders on the Colorado, same Arizona and Nevada. Lots of players and the upper basin states. So a lot of work to do. Very serious. Take it very seriously. But I can say for MWD, we're trying to think in a different way, and really assess everything in light of a changing climate.
Yeah, you want to say something? Yes.
Yeah, if I may add to that, like maybe one of the proposals we're doing to LA and other coastal cities actually use water from MWD. Obviously, like water conservation is key, reuse is key as well. We do believe like sustainable desalination should be part of the water portfolio, even if it's a modest or a large percentage. Like that water that is not needed locally could be used elsewhere along the pathway of the river, and essentially starting early, like at modest scale, showing what's it's capable of, and if the cities are happy with what we do at modest scale, we can scale later on and not wait late to, okay, now let's jump like straight to the really big plant because we don't have the choice to. So the proposal likes to start small. And
Just one quick thing I would say to this, and then we have to wrap it, is what we have seen actually, and obviously your technology is very different, but what we have seen in California, desalination doesn't necessarily leave water in the river because of what exactly Nancy said. People have these water rights, and they are subject to use it or lose it. So even if they are building local supplies, they still want to make sure they, show that they're using the water rights that they have. And I think that goes back to the whole discussion of we have an old water rights system, we have an old policy model that is really not fit to help us transition to a different model that we need to meet future demand or future water or achieve water security. And I think we can have all the technologies in the world, we can build all the things we want, but we really do need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to policy and rethink that. And I could have had this conversation for like another hour. I feel like it did not do justice, but I do invite you to come and have conversations with our amazing panelists here. And thanks for your interest, and we appreciate the questions. And please join me to thank our panelists.